The soaring cost of energy. British companies call for immediate action from the government. There are more talks today between ministers and manufacturers, amid a warning that some factories could soon shut down.
I'm saying today, and Liberty is saying today, and the whole sector is saying today, come on government, don't sit on your hands, take action now.
Meanwhile, the government is trying to diffuse a row between the Business Department and the Treasury over whether to offer state support. We'll have the latest on that from Westminster, also this lunchtime. The Metropolitan Police says it's taking no further action after a review into sexual abuse allegations surrounding Prince Andrew. New data shows that 1 in 6 of those most critically ill with COVID-19 are unvaccinated pregnant women. From today, adults in Wales who want to get into a nightclub or a large event will have to prove that they are fully jabbed or show a negative test result. Prince Charles tells the BBC he wants more ambitious action on climate change and that he understands why protesters take to the streets.
What about the people who protest? What about kind of Extinction Rebellion? Do you understand why they go out
of course I
and
do.
the streets?
Yes, but it isn't helpful, I don't think, to do it in a way that alienates people.
And who broke up the Beatles? Half a century on, Paul says it was John.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Wales prepare for their crucial World Cup qualifier against Estonia tonight. They're third in their group, meaning the playoffs are their most likely hope of qualifying.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Ministers are holding more talks today with manufacturers who are struggling because of the sharp rise in energy prices. Industries such as steel and glass have called for emergency support. And yesterday, the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, claimed he's been discussing with the Treasury how best to help hard-hit companies. The Treasury, though, denied there had been any such talks, with the spokesperson accusing Mr Kwarteng of making things up. Here's our business correspondent, Theo Leggett.
Are flying. Industries hit hard by soaring energy costs are growing ever louder in their calls for government action. Steel makers, cement companies, ceramics firms and glass makers, they're warning that furnaces could go cold and factories shut down.
We have companies already paying £2 or £3 million a month more for their gas price than they did before the crisis. Invested in a furnace that might cost 20 or 30 million pounds to rebuild, it really does inform the decision whether you can continue or whether you have to close down a furnace.
The Treasury is facing a difficult dilemma. Any sort of direct intervention would be costly, and the government doesn't want to be seen to be bailing out failing businesses. But even a cost cap for industry, which is what companies are asking for, risks simply transferring the problem somewhere else. That's led to widely reported friction between the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, and the Treasury. Today, the government insisted officials from both departments are in talks over a solution. But in the steel industry, hit hard by rising costs, patience is running out.
I need the Prime Minister directly to bang ministerial heads together. You know, we've seen this reported infighting between Treasury and the Business Department. You know, we do not need that sort of infighting when we're in the emergency we're in now. So come on, Prime Minister, directly address the energy prices.
The government insists it's in control of the situation and is working with businesses to find a solution which will keep factories open.
The Business Secretary is in regular talks and again today with industry about exactly the effects on those sectors, particularly the energy-intensive sectors, which have had, as you know, additional government support over the last number of years as we move, as we decarbonise and move eventually to a net zero future.
While power-hungry businesses are wondering how to keep their factories running, millions of ordinary consumers are also facing a steep rise in energy costs and wondering how they'll heat their homes this winter. And as the nights close in, those pressures show no signs of easing. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
And let's go to our political correspondent, Ione Wells, who's at Westminster. And Ione, this question of whether to help industry has become really political.
That's right, Ben. I mean, the first thing to say is the government are now extremely worried about this. There is a recognition in government that these are normally quite competitive firms who have been hit by this temporary rise in wholesale gas prices, and their big fear is industries failing and jobs being lost too. The problem is that the government doesn't yet have an answer to all of this. The business ministers have been meeting repeatedly with some of these firms to try and come up with a current solution, but currently they don't have one yet, and no kind of bid has been put to the Treasury for any kind of financial support yet from the business department. Now, Number 10 confirmed today that business officials and Treasury officials are talking to one another, that Treasury officials are being engaged throughout all of this. And I understand that the Department for Business is planning to put some kind of bid forward to the Treasury for financial support once some kind of solution is agreed with some of these firms. They're discussing at the moment what that kind of solution could be, whether existing support is enough, although firms have made it pretty clear that they don't think any existing support is enough to get them through the current crisis. Now, the backdrop to all of this is firms warning about having to halt production, but also a growing number of Conservative MPs, particularly in areas very reliant on energy-intensive industries, calling for government intervention, calling for government support as well to try and help some of the areas who may be hit if communities start getting impacted by job losses or industries having to halt production.
Thank you. Ione Wells there, our political correspondent. The Metropolitan Police won't take any further action against the Duke of York following an investigation into sexual assault allegations. An American woman, Virginia Giuffre, is bringing a civil lawsuit against the Duke of York in the United States, claiming she was forced to sleep with him after she was trafficked as a teenager. The Prince has consistently denied any wrongdoing. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has this report.
The decision by the Metropolitan Police to take no further action means there's no prospect of a formal criminal investigation involving Prince Andrew here in the UK. He, of course, has stepped back from royal duties, having strongly and consistently denied any impropriety. However, this is far from the end of the matter. The search for the truth about the circumstances which led up to the taking of this photograph of Andrew and the then 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre more than 20 years ago continues, principally through the civil lawsuit which Miss Giuffre has brought in New York. Andrew has remained largely out of sight in recent months, either at Royal Lodge, his home in Windsor Great Park, or at the Queen's estate at Balmoral. An initial offer to answer questions from the US authorities about his friendship with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein ran into difficulties. US prosecutors claimed there was a lack of cooperation. After months of delay, Andrew has now appointed lawyers in the United States to represent him. The US civil case could take a number of months to make progress. But for the royal family, there's a more immediate problem. We're now just 4 months from the start of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, when she'll mark her 70 years on the throne. Family members and officials will be hoping that this significant milestone in her long reign will not be marred by stories from a New York courtroom. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
NHS England has stepped up appeals for pregnant women to get vaccinated against COVID. New data shows that 1 in 6 of the most critically ill patients in hospital are pregnant and unvaccinated. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists said this demonstrates that there is a significant risk of severe illness from the virus in pregnancy. Well, our health editor Hugh Pym is with me now, and Hugh, just talk us through this latest data.
Well, Ben, the data comes from NHS England, and it concerns the most intensive form of life support you can get in a hospital if you're a COVID patient. It's known as ECMO, which is in effect an artificial lung. Now, NHS England says between July and September, 118 patients were admitted in England for this treatment, of which 20 were pregnant, and of those 19 were unvaccinated. So this is being used as a bit of a wake-up call to people out there to actually go and get the jab, if at all possible, quickly, because of the dangers which may lie ahead with COVID. Claire Bromley from Kent was 26 weeks pregnant. She was just about to have her jab. She decided to go ahead and then got the virus. She had to go to a local hospital, then up to a specialist centre in London, and ended up on a ventilator. And here's what she had to tell us.
My husband, because of COVID, wasn't allowed to come in and see me So I was messaging him, which I don't really remember too much of, and I've looked back over the messages since. But I was messaging him saying that I didn't want to let him down, and I didn't want to die, and I also worried about what if they wouldn't be able to wake me up again. So it was, it was a very scary time.
So Claire has made an appeal to all those in her sort of situation. An expectant mum, just go and get your jab if you haven't already had one. That message is really being pushed hard now by NHS and Health and Royal College leaders. And one point they're making is that if you're pregnant and you do get COVID in the latter stages of pregnancy, you can get really pretty seriously ill. And the reason why is explained to us by Dr. Edward Morris of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists.
Pregnant mums towards the end of their pregnancy have extra strains on their bodies anyway, and if COVID arrives and infects them, they are more likely to develop complications such as pneumonia, needing ventilation, or early delivery of their baby.
That was Dr. Edward Morris of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists. Now, there was some confusion back in the spring for pregnant women about whether it was safe to go ahead and have the vaccine, and maybe some of the messaging hasn't been as clear as it should be. But health leaders are now saying all the research on hundreds of thousands of pregnant women who've been vaccinated is that there is no evidence of any harm to the fetus or the new child.
Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh Pym, our health editor. Anyone in Wales who wants to visit a bar, nightclub or large event will, from today, need to prove that they've had 2 doses of the COVID vaccine or produce a negative lateral flow test result. The Welsh Government says it hopes bringing in a COVID pass will ease pressure on the NHS this winter. Thomas Morgan is in Cardiff with the latest. Thomas.
You may remember it was last Wednesday that this decision was passed in the Senedd after one Tory MP wasn't able to vote, couldn't log in on Zoom to give the negative vote, which meant that actually this decision was passed. And from today, as you mentioned, everyone going to a nightclub or to large events in Wales will be required to show an NHS COVID pass, which can show that it had been double vaccinated or show a recent negative lateral flow tests. Now, we've spoken to a number of businesses in the city centre in the middle of Cardiff, and the decision to implement these COVID passes has been met with some scepticism and some concern by those in the industry. The nighttime industry across the UK is wishing for a bumper Christmas this year, following 2020's second lockdown. However, in Wales from today, those that'll be spending the early hours clubbing will need a vaccine pass before entering those establishments.
It is certainly an inconvenience, but nothing that we can't go around. But it won't be even close as an inconvenience as it is to be asked to close down. So if that's what we must do, then that's what we will do.
The vaccine passports are a good idea because it ensures a set rules of security for the community that does go on a night out.
But like, it's not fair for the people who haven't had the vaccine and who are too scared to get the vaccine. I mean, there are some people out there who don't want to get the vaccine.
I was like one of the people that were super waiting to be called to have the shot of the vaccine, so I completely agree with this.
The pass will show that individuals have either been double vaccinated or have had a recent lateral flow negative test, and people can be fined if they fake this information. With no app available in Wales, the public must apply via the NHS website, supplying personal details and ID. And near the end of the process, you're asked to record a short video of a sequence of numbers so that they can match your face to the photo ID provided. 6293.
Because Italy are struggling.
Autumn is also rugby season in Wales, and for the first time since spring last year, the capital will be absolutely heaving once again as the country takes on the might of the Southern Hemisphere. And passes will also be needed for these large events, venues and concerts. On the 30th of October, this place will be full once again as 72,000 people come to Cardiff's Principality Stadium to witness Wales take on the All Blacks. But it may be unreasonable and unsafe to have thousands queuing outside waiting to be checked. So potentially only a portion will have to provide their vaccine pass. Whereas in nightclubs,
everyone may be asked to produce their vaccine pass, as queuing is the norm there.
Some businesses in the Welsh capital have expressed concern at the lack of clarity on this issue, questioning the different approaches taken by each UK nation government.
We just don't get it. We just don't get the discrepancy between England and Wales. So, and then you're left with a situation as in, for example, with colleague businesses in Newport, plenty of their customers will probably be hopping over the bridge for a good night out in Bristol come next weekend.
The First Minister has said that if things remain as they are, the economy and life in Wales would remain as is over the winter period. However, if things do deteriorate, measures could be brought back into daily life to help relieve the pressure on the NHS. Once again highlighting that the pandemic isn't over just yet.
Mr Drakeford, the First Minister, has also said this lunchtime that were things to get worse over the winter period, there would be a consideration to be using COVID passes to access care homes and hospitals where the most vulnerable in our society may be meeting those outside in the public, but that's only if the situation deteriorates. He's also added, though, that the COVID passes aren't long-term, they're only as the pandemic is in its worst stages.
Thomas, thank you. Thomas Morgan there. Travel has opened up today between the UK and dozens of long-haul destinations, including Mexico and South Africa. 47 countries were removed from the red list at 4 o'clock this morning, meaning that people arriving from those locations no longer need to spend 11 nights of quarantine in a hotel. Fully vaccinated people in Sydney have been able to go to cafes, restaurants, hairdressers and gyms for the first time today after nearly 4 months of lockdown. Restrictions were eased after the state of New South Wales reached a 70% double-dose vaccination target for over 16s. Shaima Khalil reports now from Sydney.
A day so many in New South Wales have been waiting for.
Okay, cheers, boys.
Especially those in Sydney and the surrounding areas. After more than 100 days in lockdown, cafes, restaurants and bars have finally reopened.
It's a massive relief, you know, to see the smiles on these guys' faces.
I literally took the day off work tomorrow just so I could stay up late tonight.
Yeah, finally. Couldn't wait for that.
There will still be COVID-19 rules in place. Inside venues, social distancing and masks are mandatory. And the main feature of this reopening is that businesses will be responsible for making sure customers provide proof of vaccination.
It has been a difficult 100 days, but the efforts that people have made right across the state to go out, to get vaccinated, has enabled this great day to occur. There are going to be challenges, we know that. I ask again everybody right across our state to treat everybody with kindness and respect.
This is the first step out of lockdown, with New South Wales reaching 70% vaccination rate. And with many restrictions eased, life is looking quite different for those who've had their double jabs. Many have started their day in the gym, something they haven't been able to do for more than 3 months now.
It's been a bit tricky to stay motivated, but coming back into the gym, you've got all this equipment, got a trainer, so much better. Looking at the rest of the world, hopefully we can stay open and do our thing.
Welcome! Hey, how are you? Very good, very good.
While others have rushed for that long-awaited haircut.
Thank you to all of us for that. Well done.
New South Wales is the first state in Australia to shift from elimination or a zero COVID cases strategy to reopening while ramping up vaccination numbers. The rest of the country will be watching to see what living with the virus looks like and how it will work. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Sydney.
And the time is 19 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The soaring cost of energy. British companies call for immediate action from the government after warning that some factories could soon shut down. And coming up, secrets in suburban America. A married couple are arrested by the FBI on suspicion of spying.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, Andy Murray recovered from a set-down to beat 18-year-old Carlos Alcaraz, putting him through to the third round of Indian Wells, where he'll next play the Olympic champion Alexander Zverev.
Prince Charles has told the BBC that he can see why campaigners from groups like Extinction Rebellion take to the streets to demand action on climate change. But he suggested protest action such as blocking roads does not help their cause. He's been speaking to our climate editor Justin Rowlatt in the garden of his home on the Balmoral estate.
Great to see you.
Made it. This was a rather empty field that the farm didn't need anymore. The great thing was I managed to plant it the same year that my grandson was born, the eldest, George. So I thought I'd call it Prince George's.
But this is what's so interesting, coming back kind of 50 years later and talking here in this beautiful garden of yours, that the narrative has changed. You know, and lots of the things that you said are now mainstream.
It's taken far too long.
World leaders are gathering in Glasgow to talk about the kind of issues that you were...
Yeah, but they just talk. And the problem is to get action on the ground, which is what I've been trying to do for the last 40 years.
What about the people who protest? What about kind of Extinction Rebellion? Do you understand why they go out
of course
and
I
disrupt
do.
the streets?
Yes, but it isn't helpful, I don't think, to do it in a way that alienates people. So I totally understand the frustration. The difficulty is how do you direct that frustration in a way that is more constructive rather than destructive. So, I mean, the point is that people should really notice how despairing so many young are.
So let me ask you this. Is our government doing enough to make these things happen?
I couldn't possibly comment.
You've got a pretty hefty carbon footprint. I mean,
yes.
Put it like this, it must take a lot of gas to heat a palace.
Yes, yes, but I have tried for a very long time to make sure that the heating is done in a way that is as sustainable as possible. So, I mean, I put in, biomass boiler systems and then the solar panels. I've got electric cars, and it's been so difficult.
One thing that not everybody knows about you is you are a bit of a Clarkson, is it fair to say? Jeremy Clarkson, a bit of a kind of petrol head, and you've always enjoyed cars.
No.
You've enjoyed cars.
Well, yes. But that was before we knew what the problems were, particularly. But my old Aston Martin, which I've had for 51 years, that runs on, can you believe this, surplus English white wine. And whey from the cheese presses.
What would you say to people watching this in terms of diet? Should they be eating less meat?
The business of what we eat, of course, is important. I mean, for years, I haven't eaten meat and fish on 2 days a week. And I don't eat dairy products on 1 day a week. Now, I mean, that's one way to do it. If you did that, if more did that, you would reduce a lot of the pressure on the environment and everything else.
Prince Charles talking to our climate editor. FBI agents have arrested a married couple in West Virginia on suspicion of selling secrets to what the pair believed was a foreign power. Data cards containing sensitive information about the designs for nuclear-powered warships and submarines were handed to an undercover agent. They were hidden in packets of chewing gum, and one was concealed in a peanut butter sandwich. Here's Mark Lebel.
This alleged below-the-radar attempt to reveal nuclear submarine secrets, now sunk, could have been a thriller worthy of the name A Spy Who Fed Me, with a data card slipped into a peanut butter sandwich, and then a chewing gum package, and finally a plaster wrapper. Neighbours of the detained couple, who live here in this discreet neighbourhood of Maryland, are in disbelief.
Wow. It's pretty incredible. It's like out of a movie, you know?
It's a quiet neighborhood, and everyone's very law-abiding, so it was a little surprising.
It began in April last year, when US Navy nuclear engineer Jonathan Tebbe offered to sell restricted data concerning the design of nuclear-powered warships to an unnamed foreign power. He wrote, "I apologise for this poor translation into your language. Please forward this letter to your military intelligence agency. I believe this information will be of great value to your nation. This is not a hoax." But the FBI says one of its foreign undercover agents was passed the letter, which had a return address in Pennsylvania, and used encrypted emails to smoke the sender out. After a sweetener of $10,000 in cryptocurrency and a further diplomatic gesture to win trust, Jonathan bit. The FBI says he agreed to drop off data in June at a secret location in West Virginia with his wife, a humanities teacher, on the lookout. There, a data card was fed into a peanut butter sandwich, for which he received a further $20,000. Then in August, a further drop-off in Eastern Virginia, involving a chewing gum package and a $70,000 payoff. Finally, the FBI pounced during a third drop-off in West Virginia on Saturday. The secrets were up for sale on these nuclear-powered warships weeks after America agreed to sell similar secrets to the Australians in an attempt to counter Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific region. But no more, as this spy, who has been dragged in from the cold, will now appear at court on Tuesday. Mark Lobel, BBC News.
This year's Nobel Prize in Economics has been shared between 3 economists who use natural experiments to answer important questions for society. Half the award goes to Canada's David Card for his contribution to labour economics. The other half is split between America's Joshua Angrist and the Dutch-American Guido Imbens for their methodological contributions to the analysis of causal relationships. Now, for almost 50 years, Sir Paul McCartney has been blamed for breaking up the Beatles, but in a new BBC interview, he has said that the split was actually initiated by John Lennon. Let's get more on that from our music correspondent, Mark Savage. Mark, tell us more about what Sir Paul has been saying.
Well, like you say, Sir Paul has been shouldering the blame for breaking up the Beatles since 1970, and there's 2 reasons for that. First of all, he was the first person to acknowledge that the band were on a break in a press release for his debut album, which came out that year. And in that, he said that he couldn't foresee a time when he would ever work with John Lennon again. And then later that year, he sued the rest of the band to dissolve their business relationship. So really, since then, fans and scholars have assumed that it was Sir Paul who instigated the breakup of the Beatles. But in a new interview for Radio 4's This Cultural Life programme, he said that's not the case.
I'm not the person who instigated the split.
You brought the lawyers in there, didn't you?
Oh, no. John walked into the room one day and said, I'm leaving the Beatles. And he said, it's quite thrilling. It's rather like a divorce. And then we were left to pick up the pieces. But I didn't instigate the split. That was our Johnny.
So Sir Paul went on to say in the interview that John Lennon wanted to spend more time with Yoko Ono and staging his famous peace protests, and certainly we know that John missed the last ever full recording session of the Beatles in 1970 because he was on holiday with Yoko. But the interesting thing that came at the end of this interview is that Sir Paul said that if John hadn't walked away, then the Beatles would have continued to make albums.
Oh, fascinating. Mark Savage, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A new report says periods, low confidence and being watched by other people are all factors preventing about a third of girls in England enjoying sport. The Youth Sports Trust says periods have become the biggest concern for girls when doing exercise at school. The charity is campaigning to give girls a greater say in PE in schools. The England footballer Marcus Rashford says the support he got after being targeted with racist abuse after the Euro 2020 final was a special moment for him. He suffered a torrent of abuse after missing a penalty in the final, but he told Sally Nugent the words of encouragement that he received from fans was something he'd never forget.
There's never a time that racism is acceptable, or we should accept racism and just get on with our lives. But for, probably on the biggest stage that racism has been in front of us as young players. It was nice to see so many people supporting us without us even saying anything.
How did you cope with that mentally at the time?
This might sound crazy, but the aftermath, you're not quite mentally, tuned into it because you're still thinking about the game. And for me, that was the case. It took me about a week or 2 weeks to, clear my head, and then I started taking note of, the different types of people that have, stepped up and started defending us and, spreading the word that racism isn't okay.
In the aftermath of what happened, there was this outpouring of love and support for you, which was, we could see very clearly when your mural was decorated with letters and notes, which I know have been kept. What do you think when you look at the mural, that image of the mural with all the notes and letters posted on it? How does that make you feel?
That was nice. It's something that, you won't ever forget, really. It's hard to describe the feeling that it gives you, but I've always said out in public that I want to see people act as one in communities and environments, and that was one big highlight for me, that it was a time when everybody came together, and whatever they thought was the right thing to do, they just done it. And yeah, it was a special moment.
And what is it like to have Cristiano Ronaldo back at the club?
Yeah, that's a great feeling for me as a player, but as a fan of the club as well. I think it's always nice when, you know, a club legend finds a way back to the club, and to be playing with him, you know, back at Old Trafford is a terrific feeling, and hopefully it gives us the push that we need to start winning these trophies.
Marcus Rashford talking to Sally Nugent. OK, it's weather time now. Let's get the latest forecast for the week ahead with Thomas.
Ben, thank you, and a good afternoon to you. Well, Mother Nature's being kind to us at the moment. The weather really is not bad at all out there. There's a fair bit of cloud around, and I think we'll be stuck with the cloud for the next few days, but some sunshine too. But it's not like it everywhere. In fact, the far north of the country has got a fair bit of thick cloud, and that's because around this area of high pressure, which will be dominating our weather for the next few days, is also a lot of cloud. In fact, there's a low pressure just where my head is out there in the Atlantic, and a weather front is grazing the north of the country, and you can see quite substantial cloud there across parts of Scotland, especially the northwest Highlands and also the Hebrides. So the weather is quite wet here, but I think south of the lowlands it's more or less the same, so variable amounts of cloud. And actually the further south you are, the brighter the skies will be, and where the sun comes out it'll be around 15 to 17 degrees, and not much changes through the night. And that's because the high pressure is pretty much anchored across Ireland, so the weather kind of wants to go around the area of high pressure. Nothing really moves much from west to east all the other way around. So we've just got a thick area of thick cloud with bits and pieces of rain maybe sliding just along the North Sea coast tomorrow on Tuesday. So out towards the west and towards the south, that's where the brighter skies will be and the slightly higher temperatures, so 17 in Cardiff, maybe even 17 there in Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. So the high pressure is pretty much almost over us, certainly across England, Wales and Northern Ireland on Wednesday, but again across Scotland, very close to these weather fronts, which are just grazing the north of the UK, bringing some spits and spots, but on the whole, middle of the week isn't looking bad at all. And again, with a bit of brightness, prolonged brightness, temperatures getting up to 17 degrees in London, 15 there in Glasgow and Newcastle, which is slightly higher than what we'd expect to see this time of the year. Now on Thursday, there is a subtle change to what the atmosphere wants to do. In fact, a cold front is approaching, and behind the cold front, the winds switch direction. They start to come in from the north, and you can see that big jump in the direction. Northerly here, southwesterly here. So where the southwesterly is, it's mild and bright. Where the northerly is, the temperatures start to drop, and that bit in between, that is what we call a weather front, and that's where we'll have some outbreaks of rain across Scotland. So this is the summary for this week. You can see high teens, mid-teens for most of us, and a little bit of rain there in the north to start the week and end the week as well. That's it.
Thomas, many thanks indeed, and a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. The soaring cost of energy. British companies call for immediate action from the government after warning that some factories could soon shut down. And that's all from the BBC News at 1. So it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.